My name is Danielle Mintier, and I'm a geology major. I'm in the master's program, and I chose SFA because I had family that went here. The small classroom size allowed me to have a more proactive learning environment, and I really enjoyed the more one-on-one connections I had with my professors. I chose geology as my major because I've always had an interest in being outside. I picked up rocks whenever I was a little kid. That really helped me learn, and I found a passion for it, and I found a passion for finding energy, which is what I want to do for my future. I want to be a seismic analyst in the petroleum industry, looking for natural resources throughout the globe. I would recommend SFA to my friends because it's a great university with talented faculty, and the small town life makes it a great place to call home. And as always, axe 'em jacks.
Lambert's gone. All right, good morning. Let's keep our show on the road. It's time to have a little, let's get a little extra energy for the energy segment of our program. Great to be here. I'm going to say, I ought to get Kim Childs to go in the back and start shooing people this way for energy and the other way for school safety. But we want to go forward and talking about this. We have a really exciting program for you this morning dealing with energy. We're going to break this into two. We're kind of doing this a little bit different because we have a special person with us here today, one of our statewide elected officials, our only statewide elected official from East Texas. Not only that, a graduate of Stephen F. Austin State University, the Honorable Wayne Christian, will be having a conversation today, and he's going to be led by our former state senator, former ag commissioner, all-around good guy, native of Palestine, Texas, the Honorable Todd Staples. And so we're going to have that first, and then we're going to come up, have a panel of our colleagues in the House and Senate. Be here. Senator Nichols is going to be part of that. We did have one of our members had to go back to Stan Lambert's going to be subbed out. Stan, who's the second member from Abilene Christian University, me being the first in the legislature. So my other Wildcat had to go back because he's also a granddad, and he's got to go tend to some family duties. But we got a great bunch of guys here that are going to talk to us about energy. But what we want to do is kick off, have a conversation about the state of energy and the role of Texas. And the importance that it plays. You know, Wayne, I'll tell you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say on this, but the world has returned to its axis. We're back where things should have been. Back in the 50s and 60s, the most important organization for energy in the world that drove it was the Railroad Commission of Texas. And things are coming back to where they ought to be. Anytime Texas is in the lead, it's a good thing for this nation, a good thing for the world. So with that, I'm going to shut up and listen to the people who actually know what they're talking about. So Brother Staples, if you would please take us away.
Thank you very much, Representative Clardy. Thank you and Senator Nichols and Stephen F. Austin State University and the Nacogdoches Chamber for hosting this legislative summit. We're excited to be talking about energy today, the real driver of our state's economy. Texas leads the nation in oil and gas production and pipeline miles and refining capacity. When you're talking about energy anywhere in the world today, you're talking about the Lone Star State. And obviously, the Texas Railroad Commission plays an enormously important role. We have with us today the 50th commissioner of the Texas Railroad Commission, graduate of SFA. You're at home here this morning, Commissioner, as am I. I drove behind 5 logging trucks to get here this morning. It's the first time I'd done that in 3 or 4 years. It was a really good feeling, and I was glad to see that kind of economic activity occurring. You bring to this position a legislative experience, having served on the Regulated Industries as Vice Chair on the Energy Resources Committee. Governor Abbott appointed you to represent Texas on the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission. So you come into this position at a time when energy is on a rebound, production is increasing, jobs are increasing. There was a big lull there. And as you see this type of growth, we're thinking about jobs, we're thinking about economic impact. What are some challenges that could inhibit this growth and this trajectory that Texas is on because of the rebound of oil and gas today?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Todd. The thing, of course, that you're well aware of, and Todd's doing a great job with the Texas Oil and Gas Association. They've been some great friends. I remember when I first was elected, Lisa and I were in Austin on election night, and the next night y'all were having an event down at Bastrop, And I told Lisa, well, let's drive back down through Bastrop and say hi to Todd and the Texoga folks. And we did, and literally, this is with my hand up the truth. On the radio, as Lisa and I were driving down there, U.S. Energy Department announces the largest discovery of oil in the history of the world in Midland, Texas. 900 barrels of oil, some is 1,000 barrels, it was huge. And then the second broadcast immediately after that was the EPA withdrew a 5-year lawsuit against the state of Texas. You know, I'm sitting there thinking, driving down to the Texoga guys, I said, if Donald Trump can take credit for 1,000 jobs with Carrier air conditioner, you know, I can walk into Texoga and say, well, I've got you the biggest discovery in history and shut down the EPA lawsuit. What else can I do for you on day 2? You know? But it is exciting. Oil and gas in Texas is absolutely mind-boggling. It went to IOGCC, the 31 states that produce oil and gas. And literally, Texas on the Excel spreadsheet, they had all the other 30 states on one spreadsheet. And to go to Texas, they literally had to flip the screen to the second page. Our line was so far ahead of all the other 31 states. It's just phenomenal what Texas is doing. We have 2 refineries being built, one in Corpus and one in Midland. We have a plastics generating plant or a facility for utilizing it down in Corpus. We've expanded the port in Corpus now to handle the mega tankers. We have the largest number of pipelines being created, most between Corpus and Midland, but coming from other places too. Of course, Angelina County with BP last week, we were at that announcement of expansion here in Deep East Texas, which excites me. I think 28 wells predicted this year alone in Angelina County. And San Augustine already has, so it's sweeping for the Haynesville Shale. Neat thing about the Haynesville Shale, which I'm very selfish, I'm definitely East Texan, but the 4 liquefied natural gas, LNG ports, we have one in Lake Charles. There's another being built right now. 4,500 people it's taking just to construct those. They're huge. And liquefied natural gas, funny thing about that, we originally were an importer of liquefied natural gas. These companies were set to import it. Now we're exporting. And it's going to be one of the #1 exports of the United States. Anyhow, you have Corpus, then the next one's in Baytown, and then I forget where the other one's going, the 4th one that's coming. And so number 4, Freeport? Freeport. Well, understand, guess who, when you drain the gas south, which is the nearest shale to that? It's the Haynesville Shale that's in direction for that. So it's very exciting of what the future holds for us in East Texas. But you know, to come to the point, you know, you remember back, y'all are all too young to remember, but I remember when Jimmy Carter was on national television with a sweater on and all this in the White House, and he said, we only have about 8 to 10 years of oil and gas left, and that's when we had the lines at the pumps and all this. Let me report to you. The technology in the state of Texas has unleashed, with horizontal drilling, the shale play. BP's head economist came over to the Federal Reserve and told us that the state of Texas, with horizontal drilling and fracking, had changed the world dynamics on oil and gas. And we have currently about 600 years of natural gas and oil that we've identified. And I mean, that is a little bit longer than Jimmy Carter's 8 years. And so what I have found is the challenges is a singular thing, is that we, I believe, all want to consider on any issue we consider the positives and the negatives on the issues. What's happened is the environmental, the Sierra Clubbers, the Nobel laureate Al Gore crew, and all these folks that I call the extremists on green energy. We've accepted their false statements, and literally, I challenge you to research it. Many of their false statements, they make their predictions on past models, and the past models do not consider one slightly important factor, and that's human technology. And when they factor things in, for example, we were going to run out of gas. Gore said we're going to have 10 feet increase in the waves along the coast, which would have submerged by this time 1/3 of the United States in water, the southern United States, literally. And these type of predictions keep coming up. If you remember in Houston, Dallas, Austin, they used to have smog alerts about 10, 15 years ago. No longer. We now have what's called pollen alerts. Why? What happened? Technology. We cleaned it up. And that's something that in every one of their models of the environmental extremists, they never calculate mankind's human technology. So I think it's very important.
Well, misinformation is found in a lot of different fields, and here on a university campus, it's good to know that Texas is a science-based, regulated industry, that science rules the day. I know at the commission, you work with the legislature funds the Texas Railroad Commission budget. They gave you resources for technology advancements, for new inspectors, Can you talk about the regulatory process there and what the work that you do and with the resources that they've given enables you to lead that science-based agency?
Exactly. Last session, the governor, lieutenant governor had predicted that, of course, we were under sunset for the third time. And what, as a guy that's been a banker in financial business for a number of years, one of the greatest hindrances to expansion of business in Texas and the United States has been uncertainty. And when you're operating under uncertainty, the industry is hesitant to invest long term. And so the legislature and many of the gentlemen here did a great job in getting that sunset settled. That helped tremendously. And the chairman of Energy over here was a great friend in helping for that. And Senator Nixon also, Senator Nichols also. Senator Nichols helped tremendously in that too and worked with us. And one thing I found as an old ex-banker is I went in for the first time to find out, well, what is the return? I know that public education, God bless, is a constitutional cost to the state, as is law enforcement, as is TxDOT, transportation, which Senator Nichols used to be a commissioner also on TxDOT and helped us tremendously in rural Texas. Great job in doing that as he continues today. But one thing I asked, I'm an old banker, so I asked our head accountant to find out what the return of investment by the legislature is on the Railroad Commission. And I found out he came back the next day. For every dollar the legislature funds the Railroad Commission, they return to the state $51.25. So that's a 50-to-1 return on the dollar. I'm an old banker. I tell you, we can sell that one any day on the free market. And that's what oil and gas does for us. So we have a staff of over 700 people at the Railroad Commission. We have literally a battery of judges and attorneys. We have enforcement people. I think it's around 120 inspectors we currently have that go out across the state. We have about, I think, 15, I've got the numbers here, but it's around 15 district offices and about 6 or 7 pipeline offices separate all across the state of Texas, and their job is to keep you safe. And when there's a report that something's going wrong, we do an inspection. The staff at the commission reviews that and keeps under review, and if they do not cure that over time, then that's when it comes before we 3 commissioners for the final judgment on what we should do about those issues. 2 good points to make. The EPA, back during Barack Obama, when they were having the trouble with the earthquakes up in Oklahoma, issued one scolding letter to Oklahoma, which was a great compliment to the Texas state. And it said, at least you guys in Oklahoma, if y'all had done like the Railroad Commission in Texas, you wouldn't have near the problems that you have right now. Secondly, about 3 months ago, and you can watch this on the internet recordings, the EPA joined the Texas Railroad Commission and commended the Railroad Commission in the research we had done regarding injection wells, which are disposal wells, injection wells, all. And they researched, I think, that we had the Railroad Commission did a project, and we researched several thousand of the wells across the state of Texas. Not one instance, Todd, not one instance of pollution of drinking water. Not one instance could be proven anywhere. We also, that's with injection wells, disposal wells, and other. So we got the compliment from the EPA was this was a dynamic, tremendously wonderful research project. So yes, our job is to protect the public, and I think you'll find the Railroad Commission of Texas is leading the way in doing exactly that.
I think the Railroad Commission of Texas is looked at worldwide as a leader in the regulatory body. I know just last time you all met, you levied fines, I think, of over $800,000 for if people were not in compliance. You have the ability to remove their permit, take it away where they cannot even do business. But it's done in a fair, even-handed way. It's done in a robust way, in a science-based way. And I think that's why you've seen the reinvestment in Texas, the growth that we've had here. As we think about the growth here in the Haynesville that you talked about with BP and Align and the work that they're doing, we know what's happening in the Permian Basin, the Eagle Ford Shale. Looking at the growth that we've had, the workforce has not kept up with the growth needs, and you've been a real leader in bringing people together. Have you identified things that industry needs to look at, maybe that academia needs to look at, or maybe our K through 12 system? Are there things that need to be done to keep up with the needs?
There's 3 things that I think that I've just observed. I think they're a threat to the most exciting expansion and boom in the history of the state. Literally, it's that opportunity we have. And so I think it's very important that we kind of identify, okay, what can stop this good stuff from happening? The jobs, the opportunity, the expansion, the finances to the state of Texas individually. And 3 of them. One is the financial markets. Number one, and there's a common thread of the environmental extremist acceptance that oil and gas is like tobacco. It's dirty, it's limited, and it's not going to be around forever. So we have to turn to wind and solar. You hear that all the time. And I'm afraid both the legislative bodies, the educational institutions, and therefore our public has accepted that as kind of a known fact. And we've not looked at both sides of the issue on this. And so what we're looking at is, number one, I think, is governmental overregulation and cost. You look right now, and this is two stats I've got. If you're talking about production science-wise, and let's compare natural gas to wind and solar. That's how you do the pluses and the minuses. We subsidize wind and solar. Natural gas gets, I think, $56.24 per megawatt hour, okay? Solar gets $775.75. That's 878 times the funding of natural gas. Solar receives 1,200 times the funding of natural gas. Folks, that's not free market competition. And whenever you hear, like, I know this campaign that Louisiana now has for a wind farm in Louisiana, and I hate to talk negative on something, but you start talking about the commercial on television says it helps the ratepayer to low that. Yeah, the ratepayer may see less, but the taxpayer's funding 700 times the amount of money that they have, and that's why the electric companies can make profit not off the ratepayer, but off government dollars. There's tax subsidies that are coming from the taxpayer. The other thing that happens to us is the financial markets, and what you have is because we have convinced the public, who are the shareholders to the energy companies, that oil and gas is something terrible and dirty and all this, we have shareholders that are demanding that their big companies start investing in windmills and solar panels, which are totally ineffective compared to oil and gas. And because of that, we are making decisions on the future of oil and gas many times on what's best for the next quarter, for what's going to be a profit to the shareholder, rather than long-term what's going to be best for the citizens of Texas and for the industry. But the third thing that you mentioned is the single thing I've received from employers all across the state and at IOCG, the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, for federal, the 31 states that do it, is a lack of employee availability for every area of the oil and gas expansion we're about to see happening. Every college we have of petroleum engineering are at capacity and not producing enough. And then truck drivers are tremendous. We're at a deficit for them for every segment of the oil and gas industry. So the employment opportunities are unbelievable. A little school that SFA has worked with over in Center, Texas, Panola College has worked with them, the little Shelby College Center. We're graduating, Cliff Todd, who is here, who's on the board there at Panola, introduced me real quickly. He used to work for you at the Agler, great guy. And then he carried me when I came back after being sworn into the Railroad Commission. He said, you know about the Shelby College Center School? And I said, well, I'm not aware of it. Go there. 200 kids have graduated. This is at a technical junior college, community college in Center. 200 kids graduated, 92% employment, starting salaries $60,000 to $70,000 a year. Within 3 years, these young people are making $125,000 a year with no significant investment in 2 years of training. And because they could not advance in the executive branch, Stephen F. Austin, the wisest university in the state, came alongside Panola. And they accept now 100% of the hours from that technical college, from the community college at Panola, and allow online the students as they work in the field to complete their diploma and get a 4-year diploma, which allows them to advance in the executive ranks. What a model for the state of Texas, as every company I go to says, we don't have enough labor, the schools are full. And I was out at Texas Tech Law School last week, and their energy school was with Ken Hance, was their former chancellor, and I was with him. And they expressed that they continually send students in their engineering programs and their oil and gas programs out of state, because Oklahoma has an educational facility on training, New Mexico has one, and Colorado has one. And we're sending our students from our institutions of higher education out of state to achieve what they need in training in oil and gas. And I'm thinking, as I opened, we are so far ahead in production, why the heck doesn't Texas have one of those? And so I hope that the model that SFA and Panola has established is reviewed, and that's why I have a task force you mentioned. We're meeting our 4th time next week up in Austin, and it's all the different Texas Education Agency. A real quick example of that, call the Texas Education Agency, who are in the bottom portion of the Travis building where we are in the Railroad Commission. And I told my chief of staff, his name's Travis, I said, Travis, call down at TEA. He said, we need them to educate our workforce. And Travis went down and he said, first question, this is truth. Now, this is people in the same building we are. Well, what do y'all do at the Railroad Commission? Now, this is the lower part of the same building we're in. So Travis shared and said, well, are any jobs in that? I said, the biggest opportunity for jobs in the history of our state is before us in the next few years. And they said, well, this is the year we're developing curricula. We normally tell the people that want energy training in our high school and junior high to go to the ag department. And there's a little subsection there. He said, we might develop a curricula. So they're meeting with us next week. And what a change that would be in our public school system to have a curricula for students who want to be in energy, which is 1/3 directly or indirectly of the jobs currently in the state of Texas and the biggest expansion in the future that we've ever seen. And Dr. Patillo, I appreciate him coming in now, has been very good in working with us and trying to develop and expand that good program SFA has, and as has Travis Clardy and Senator Nichols.
Well, we appreciate your leadership in that regard. We know that the industry offers a lot of opportunity for Texans. When oil and natural gas is doing well, all Texans benefit. We appreciate the energy that you bring to this position and your passion for moving Texas forward. Thank you very much for being here today, and let's congratulate and thank Railroad Commissioner Wayne Christian. Now we'll turn to the legislative panel portion of our agenda, and so if we'll have our elected officials that are serving on the energy panel come up now and take your spots, we'll go right into this. You hadn't said much this morning. You might want to. You do it. No, it's good. Or we can have them do it themselves and introduce our hometown. All right. Good morning. Good morning. We're glad to be with you today. Thank you for coming to East Texas, the oldest town in Texas, this morning. Obviously, the Senate District of Senator Nichols and State Representative Travis Clardy, to talk about what I think is the most important economic driver for the Lone Star State. We are glad that our state's economy is diversified, obviously, but we're also recognize that when oil and gas does well, all Texans do benefit, and you recognize that in the budget process. To get started out, I thought we'd have each of our panelists to tell us your hometown. This is obviously no stranger to anyone here. Senator Nichols is in Jacksonville, chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, serves on many other committees as well. Chairman Darby, why don't you start us out? Tell us your hometown, your service in the legislature, and maybe what you do on the 2% of the time you're not working on the public's problems.
Okay, great. Is this on? I don't think so. Hello?
Just pull it in a little closer, I think it is.
Hello? Hello? Yeah, you good. Darn. Okay, well, it's good to be with you this morning. I have good friends with, obviously, the senator and Travis Clardy. When they asked me to come see some trees, I don't have a lot of those green things, tall green things out in San Angelo. I'm from West Texas. I represent the Concho Valley, 9 counties. It contains a lot of the oil and gas production in the Permian Basin, a lot of food, fiber, hide, and hair, as we say out in West Texas. So it's a great place to be. We are water challenged. We have an interest in 5 reservoirs that service San Angelo, and not one of those reservoirs has over 20% of its capacity in it. So while you have a lot of water here in East Texas, we are water challenged in West Texas. Now, we do have a lot of oil and gas, and that's a good thing. And we are providing the natural resources that benefits the continued economic successes of the state are being generated in rural Texas, and but we still have our challenges there, obviously water and transportation dollars, education dollars. good jobs are always a challenge. So it's good to be with you today. It's good to be with members of the panel. I think each one of them has served on Energy Resources. I know I serve on Ways and Means with Drew Springer, but it's good to get the gang back together this morning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman King.
Thank you. Also good to be here. My district, Phil King, my district is, well, if you picture Fort Worth and you picture Denton, I am the two counties to the west, Parker and Wise. The significance of that for this panel, I think, is that the first real shale play, the Barnett Shale, started in my district, started in Decatur, where George Mitchell actually kind of did the first real marriage of horizontal drilling and of fracking and put that together that let him get into that tight shale. And but also we were the first place that you ever had a major oil and gas play, or just gas really for us, we're pretty much just dry gas, but the first place you had a production play in an area that had a lot of suburban settings. And so we were the first ones to experience a lot of the issues that kind of have pushed out into the rest of the state and the rest of the country. So delighted to be here and delighted to, as Drew said, to kind of be back with friends. We get tired of each other during session, but we really miss each other when we're away. So
That's good. Thank you. Thank you so much. Brooks Landgraf, good morning.
Well, good morning. Good morning, Todd. My name is Brooks Landgraf, and I'm from Odessa, Texas, and represent 4 counties out there in the Permian Basin. We're pushed up all the way there against New Mexico, and we have even less water than Chairman Darby does in San Angelo, and we're but we also do have quite a bit of oil and gas. Odessa is the kind of the hub for the oil and gas service industry in the Permian Basin, and that's something that we take a lot of pride in. Oil and gas are really about the only natural resources we have besides a bunch of good folks, but very happy to be here and very interested in this topic. And while I've got the mic and a little bit of free time, I do want to thank all of you here in Nacogdoches County for sending us Senator Nichols continuously, and also Representative Clardy. You sent us 2 fine legislators, and we do appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Our next representative is someone that's a native East Texan here. He understood, like I did, when Ernest Bales was on the previous panel and he said they were fixing to do something. I understood that. I knew I was home. So, Chris Paddie.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Paddie, and you're not too far from my district right now. You can be in my district in less than 30 minutes. So, but I represent 6 counties, Sabine County all the way up to Cass County, right up the border here. And so I like to often joke that I'm protecting that border, which is equally as dangerous as the one down south. So, those Louisiana folks are rough. So, and I'm one of the folks up here. I guess I'm here because I'm an alumnus of the Energy Committee. I was privileged to serve 2 terms there, and also as vice chair of Chairman Darby as well. And so obviously being an East Texan, we have a wonderful appreciation for oil and gas and what it means to our economy and for this region. And I'm privileged to be here this morning to visit on this great topic.
Thank you very much. Drew Springer.
Thank you, Todd. And I am the junior member of the Drew Caucus. So with Chairman Darby, that's our running joke in the legislature when the 2 of us are together. But House District 68, 22 counties, the most counties of any representative. And I've got at least 4 different shale plays from the Barnett all the way up to Wheeler and the Panhandle. I live in Munster, north of Denton, and so I use Chris's line a lot. He protects the eastern border, and I protect the northern border, because keeping Oklahoma from flooding in is also equally important. So, but run all the way from there north of Denton over towards Lubbock and up in. Oil and gas is now deeply in my family, as my son, who graduated with mechanical engineering this last summer, is now working in the Permian Basin, lives in Brooks's district, and there's an awful lot of opportunities out there for our young folks. He's an engineer, and all of his peers are in their 60s, and they're trying to figure out where's that next generation of engineers coming at. We've got to be producing them at schools like this, so look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Representative. Today's energy panel is sponsored by Cheniere Energy, and Cheniere is one of the companies in Texas that, because of their work and their investment, Texas is the leading natural gas producing state in the nation. The United States leads the world in natural gas production. The United States became a net exporter of natural gas last year. We have a couple of companies I see here today, BP Energy, Aligned Midstream, that are partnering up to develop more natural gas assets right here in East Texas. 2016, oil and natural gas paid about $9.4 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. Big boost to the Permanent University Fund, the Permanent School Fund. In 2017, that number jumped to $11 billion, $30 million each day, which is a staggering amount. Obviously makes the budget process a little easier for you. Of all the things that you just have to pass each session, is the appropriations bill, the finance bill is kind of the bill. Looking at the strength of natural gas and oil the last year, can you give us a little information on what does the budget picture look like for 2019? Is there going to be enough leftover money to fund the supplemental bill that wasn't funded from last session? Or do you see budget cuts coming? And Senator Nichols, we'll start that out with you, and we want everyone to jump in and let this be a free-flowing discussion. There's no filibusters on the energy panel today, so it's going to be good. Everybody will jump in.
Thank you very much. So that the audience knows, the supplemental bill is kind of the adjustment we make. We start in a legislative session to do a 2-year budget, and then when we go in the next session, we're almost at the end of the 2-year cycle, and we have to do an adjustment. It might be up, it might be down. Normally, we have to come up with more money in the supplemental to adjust it, and then we work on the new budget. The sales tax is the first piece. That's almost 60% of the budget, and so when we look at our sales tax compared to where we were last year, Comptroller's most recent report says that our sales tax for the state of Texas, first quarter, January through March, is up about 8% compared to last year. So that's good. Oil and gas production, of course, oil several years ago was over $100 a barrel. It went down, but it's been creeping back up. But the amazing thing is, even though it's been creeping up, we have been producing like crazy out there. And so the revenues the state receives from oil and gas is called the severance tax, and that's a percentage of actually what is produced. It is up the same first quarter compared to last year, 38%. It's amazing that it's up. Price is down, but the volume is up. And so the total dollars the state gets. And so 25% of that goes to funding schools, which is a very important thing. And then the remainder of that, once it reaches a certain point, half goes to the rainy day fund, the other half goes to the roads and bridges of the state for infrastructure. Voters approved that several years ago. And so I'm thinking that we're still going to be tight. I'm not sure how short we will be on the budget. The comptroller will tell us in January and then adjust it later. But there will be an adjustment. But I think we're going into a tight budget. We had a thing called Hurricane Harvey, which was the worst one of the worst U.S. disasters, natural disasters in U.S. history. And we're still trying to add up the dollars, so how much that's going to cost our state and local community. So that's the one really negative thing that we're going to be looking at. So it's going to be tight. It's my answer.
Even with the growth, you may think it's strange to start out an energy panel conversation about the budget, but energy plays such an outsized role in our state budget and is the job creator, and that's why it's so important from the legislative standpoint, from economic development standpoint. And you mentioned education and how that goes to paying public education. I think this room here today is very committed to a quality education system, both higher education and public education. Chairman Darby, I know that the Texas Commission on Public School Finance has had some meetings now. That was a commission that was created by the legislature, I think. Did y'all do that in the interim this last session?
Yes.
Tell us what you think about in terms of, we've talked about the need for a workforce. We know this special commission is out there. What are you seeing the next session may hold in terms of school finance? Will there be a school finance bill, and how might that impact this? And we all think about that because it all comes down to taxes. Taxes comes down to where you put your investment and what kind of jobs are going to be created.
Exactly. Well, the legislature, with the governor's leadership, created a commission 4 members appointed by the governor, 4 by the lieutenant governor, and 4 by the House Speaker. And so that commission has met several times, and they have been taking testimony on probably what I would call the absolute most critical issue facing this state is how do we fund our schools? Not only how do we fund them, how do we pay for it, and how do we use the money? And they are looking at all of that. They are looking at ratios, if you will, the cost of education index, and looking at that has not been adjusted since the mid-1980s, and transportation allotment since the early 1990. So a lot of the factors in how we have a school funding formula are being examined as we speak to figure out if we need to do things differently. Not only is the amount of money that we put in, but how we're using that money is coming under the purview of this commission. I'm hopeful of the commission. I hope that there's not a predetermined agenda. We've talked about what is being characterized as school choice, but that is just shorthand for vouchers. I hope the commission does not have a predetermined agenda to establish a basis for vouchers, and so it's going to be interesting as we move forward into the 86th legislative session on the recommendations of this commission. Hopefully they will come with some workable ideas that we can implement. I think when you talk about taxes, property taxes in particular, everybody is concerned about that, and rightfully so. But the single most determinative factor on the amount of your property taxes is how much do we fund schools. And so all of it works together till we have a robust discussion on how we fund schools. We're never going to have real property tax relief in this state. So with the work of my colleagues up here on the dais and others that will be working on this in the 86, I think there's no more important legislative issue than how we fund our schools and the impact that it has on property taxes here in this state.
You know, Texas produces about 40% of our nation's crude oil. It's right here from the Lone Star State. It's a phenomenal amount. For the first time in 50, 60 years, we hit a 10 million barrel a day mark. Chairman King, you mentioned your legislative district kind of being the focal point of George Mitchell and the development of new technology that has enabled this type of dominance for our state to lead our nation and lead the world, really, in terms of oil and gas. The conversation is all about what's going on in the Lone Star State today and the technology that comes from that. You're in a district also that wasn't used to that level of activity. And the fellow next to you, his area has kind of been more accustomed to that in the Permian Basin for quite some time. But in the Barnett Shale, with the explosion in recovery, that was new to your citizens. That type of activity is enabled our country to have energy dominance, to be energy secure, to allow our federal government to negotiate with other countries in a strength of position that we've never been able to negotiate with them before. And today, if you're reading the tweets, it's kind of important that we're in a position of strength considering what's going on around the world. But that was a tough issue for many citizens who were experiencing some development. Any industrial activity has some discomfort associated with it. There was a road closure, lane closure driving in this morning to Nacogdoches. Do you think, and this is something that everyone needs to weigh in, but you lived it before a lot of others did, do you think our general public recognizes the value there? There is misinformation that the commissioner talked about earlier this morning. Where do you think people stand today? Do they recognize the connection?
You know, little history on what kind of happened in my district. So we always had a little bit of very shallow oil production, a little bit of natural gas production in the district, but you didn't see rigs and you didn't see all the trucks and everything. And so a little over a decade ago, all of a sudden, and natural gas prices, which we really miss those high natural gas prices, but natural gas prices back then were $7, $8, you know, And all of a sudden, the Barnett Shale kind of took off, really starting in Wise County around Decatur, and then migrating into Parker County and Weatherford and Aledo, and then over into Tarrant County and Johnson County and Denton and Ron Simmons District. But it really all started in Parker and Wise. So we're kind of a half ag, half suburban community, both of those counties. And so the eastern parts really have a lot of housing developments, and frankly, a lot of them are really nice housing developments. And all of a sudden, people had someone showing up at their door, and in a half-acre lot or a one-acre lot, and someone coming up and offering them anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 if they would sign a lease, because the developer, who still weeps to this day, didn't retain their minerals when they developed the property. And so people going door to door. So all of a sudden, people just got this nice little check one time, and that was all great. And then shortly after that, they started seeing trucks driving through residential communities, the same communities their kids were walking to the school bus and driving home, and heavy trucks in a residential community driving up and down and driving a little fast. They had potholes and asphalt turf that was getting torn up and causing a lot of problems. And then at the same time, and the reason they were driving through there because they were drilling a well in the park or the school parking lot just down the street, and so they were getting to it that way. You had all of a sudden folks came through with something called eminent domain and said, hey, we're going to put a pipeline through your residential community here or through your business park or whatever you're doing, and you don't really have any say about that, or at least not much. We're going to put it through there, and here's what we're going to pay you for that. And then they had some concerns with water, because we were kind of going through a drought period then. And almost all the homes out there are on water, either on individual wells or they were on water systems that were operating off underground water primarily instead of surface water. And so you had a lot of deep water wells that were drilled for commercial purposes, and they started taking a whole lot of water, and because they needed it for fracking and for other things, and so that kind of went on a little bit, and my phones began to ring more and more, and then next thing, we had some folks show up with some concerns about some of the emissions that might be coming off, compressor sites and things like that. And there was a big concern about benzene at one time. Remember that? You got to remember, at that time, the only big play in the whole state was Parker and Wise County. So everything was focused there. So I didn't get any sympathy from these guys when I went to them and talked about any kind of help we needed on building roads or anything like this. And then I guess it all kind of culminated toward the end when when all of a sudden we started having some, they called them earthquakes. I think seismic activity is probably the better word for it. But we had to start having a little shaking out that arguably may or may not, I'm kind of on the more may not side still, but that it might have been caused by saltwater injection wells, which you got to do something with the flow of back water and comes out of wells, and after they frack, and then just production water, and they inject it into the ground. And so all these things started popping up. And so this was over really a 5 or 6, 7 year period. And so there was a lot of confrontation and a lot of issues that were popping up in the community. But at the same time, there was a lot of people making a lot of money. There were folks that owned, a small acreage, and that all of a sudden started getting $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a month in the mail. And all of a sudden, all these jobs popped up that people decided, well, wow, I'm not going to be a waiter because I can make $115,000 a year driving a water truck for a Bridgeport tank and truck. And all of a sudden, property taxes started really kind of looking a little more attractive, because all of a sudden, this production was getting taxed, and all the facilities above ground and underground that went with it started getting taxed. And so out of all that, I learned one rule that really predominated and answered the whole situation. There was a lot of inconvenience with having such rapid development of gas production in Parker and Wise County, and it was very disruptive. But the rule was, if you were making money off of it, you were very, very tolerant about that. If you weren't making a dime off of it, then you were a little more frustrated when your BMW hit the pothole and you had to get your tires adjusted, or when you had that pipeline going through your property. So it was kind of an interesting experience. It's really kind of all settled down now. There's very little new production, new drilling going on in our area. Tarrant County at one time was the largest producing county of natural gas because it had so much. And another little issue that came up too was cities beginning to try to regulate oil and gas production, which is typically or traditionally always been something for the state. And you take a county like Tarrant, they have 34 cities. And so if you're drilling down a mile and then maybe out another mile, you might cross through 3 or 4 different small jurisdictions, and each one of them might be trying to regulate things differently, and there was no way to comply with that. So we had a lot of issues with that too, even in my area, where some of the smaller communities tried to do that. At the end of the day, it all worked out very well. People made a lot of money. There's still people getting some pretty good, nice checks in the mail. We were getting a couple of those. They're kind of a lot more like this now than they were. So again, we missed those high prices. But again, the rule was, and what I always told all the companies that did business there, I said, do everything you can to spend money locally. Do everything you can to employ people locally. Do everything you can to invest locally, because again, if people are making money off of it, they were willing to put up with a whole lot more. A lot of the concerns that were EPA related and water related turned out really not to be as big a concern as people allege them to be. You've always got to be good stewards, sure. And we want good stewardship. Trucks are going to be trucks, and those were a problem, but we kind of worked through that, and we're still filling a few potholes every now and then. But at the end of the day, I think most people realized, one, what a tremendous economic boost it was for the area. They also realized that as they saw things go in Texas, we started talking about really for the first time having a real opportunity at energy independence. And they began to see their electric prices lowering because of the lowering price of natural gas down to, from $7 or $8 to $3 consistently today. And a lot of other things. So yeah, I think people do realize. They also saw that there was about a 10-year period there when over 50% of the new jobs after the Great Recession, over 50% of the new jobs created in the entire country were created in Texas, and almost all of those were at least in some way derivative of oil and gas production, which again started in Parker and Wise County. So yeah, I think everybody realizes that. Everybody enjoyed making money off that. They would like to start making a lot of money off of it again. But again, we're kind of dry gas, but it's been a big boost. I think people realize it. And it's all settled down now, and our roads are all repaired, and we can still breathe, and we've got plenty of water, and life is good.
Any industrial activity has challenges associated, inconveniences associated with it. I mentioned the 5 logging trucks at 6:30 a.m. this morning that I was behind. Those were 5 people with jobs because of demand and private activity that was occurring. There is no inconvenience comparable to not having a job, I'll tell you that. That's the biggest inconvenience that we can face. Representative Landgraf, you represent a portion of the Permian Basin. In 2016, there were $26 billion in merger and acquisition deals in the Permian Basin. All that's being developed now. The last time I flew into your commercial airport, I had a rental car reservation, and I went up to the counter, and there was about 40 people that were in a fight. And so I just kind of held my iPhone up, and I said, I have a confirmation, and the guy behind the counter said, come back in 2 or 3 hours, we might have a car. Representative Paddie, I hit the Uber app, and it said, I never got this message before, there are no Uber cars available. Just wasn't any there. And I went and saw the neat elderly gentleman who was a World War II vet that was kind of helping people out, and I said, where can you catch a taxi at? And he looked at me and said, son, there's no taxis left right now. You'll have to wait a while. Isn't that what's going on in the Permian Basin? Kind of tell us a little bit about that activity and how it ties into the rest of Texas.
Well, no, I think everything that you said is right. You can't get a room in Midland or Odessa or anywhere in the a hotel room in La Quinta will go for over $300 a night. And if you can find one, and if in fact, I heard a story just a few weeks ago. even the broom closet at the La Quinta Inn will be rented out, and then you wait and use the shower for somebody who checks out early, and that'll cost you $100. But yes, we're in the middle of a boom, and it's weird. It's strange to say that because West Texas Intermediate crude, which is the benchmark domestic oil price that we use, closed at $64 yesterday, which is pretty good. You know, the comptroller's office will base our budget off of $60 a barrel oil, so that's, you know, that's certainly not bad. But 10 years ago, we wouldn't have considered that price to allow us to be in an oil boom, but we are. And when I was in Odessa yesterday, you know, all those things about not being able to find a taxi cab and Uber to get a table at a restaurant, that's all true. You can't, you know, a 2-mile drive in Odessa will take you 15 or 20 minutes because of traffic congestion. So we are in the middle of a boom economy, and there's no doubt about that, and it's obviously directly related to oil prices. But the reason why that's all strange is not because that hasn't happened before, but it doesn't normally happen in the $60 a barrel range. What's different now is that beginning in 2014, we did see a downturn in the oil and gas economy. And we were in that downturn really for about 3 years, and we're only now beginning to emerge out of that. But during that downturn, during that 3-year period, oil and gas producers across the state, and particularly in the Permian Basin, were able to get leaner and meaner and more efficient with their production techniques, both scientifically and economically. And so really when the Saudis in 2014 through OPEC essentially flooded the market with Saudi oil, and it made it in an attempt to make it more difficult for American producers and specifically Texas producers in the shale plays to be able to make money. The American and Texas producers responded by becoming more efficient, and as a result, we're able to be very profitable at that amount. So kind of the saying that we have around the Permian Basin right now is, you know, $65 a barrel is the new 100, because we are seeing the economic impact at a lower price than we have historically. Now, what that means for the rest of the state is that at a relatively low oil or crude oil price, production is up because you can be profitable at that rate, and so that increases the severance tax revenue for the state that Senator Nichols was talking about, and so that will have a very positive impact for the revenue situation for the state budget. Then specifically with the increase in that severance tax as a result of the constitutional amendment that we proposed in 2015 and that voters subsequently ratified, a lot of that money is going to fund transportation projects, not only in the, well, not just in the Permian Basin, or maybe in some cases not at all in the Permian Basin, but throughout the state. And so even Nacogdoches County gets to benefit from that. So what happens in the Permian Basin, you know, Todd, you mentioned that 40% of domestic oil production occurs here in Texas. About half of that, or a little bit more than half of that, is taking place in the Permian Basin play and the Delaware Basin, which is just to the west of the Permian. So what is happening there has a tremendous impact on our energy independence, but it also has a very direct impact on the state budget. And those of us who, you know, Chairman King was talking about, you know, those who benefit from the industry can live with some of the hardships that go along with that. In the Permian Basin, you're either directly employed or directly benefit from the oil and gas industry, or you're maybe 1 degree separated from it. But everybody lives or dies based on how well the oil and gas industry is performing in the Permian Basin, because you know, we have had some successful ways of diversifying our economy, but at the end of the day, that's the main show in town. And so that's very important to all of us. But what happens there in the Permian Basin obviously has a tremendous impact across the state, and we take a lot of pride in that, and want to do our part. But it does take having that strong backbone with the infrastructure in place, and we want to make sure that we have that, because all of us across the state and really across the country will benefit from it.
With about half the rigs in the United States that are operating today are operating in Texas, and a big, strong majority of those are operating in the Permian Basin. And that product has to go somewhere. You all can only use a very little bit of that. It goes all over the world today, and natural gas and oil exports, refined product, that all returns to jobs for Texans and tax revenue to fund our schools and educate our kids and to build our roads, and we're certainly excited about that. Innovation and technology is why that has happened. Water is still a big part of oil and natural gas production. Innovation and technology is creating new opportunities. Representative Paddie, when I served in the legislature, I think most East Texans thought that the surface water belonged to them, not to the state. I didn't do anything to challenge that notion, even though I think there may be laws that says that's not quite the case. When we think about water, East Texas is blessed with it, but agriculture, municipalities, energy, we all live and die by the water, basic water that we have. In thinking about the growth models that we see in Texas, I'm just thinking, what should the state be doing in terms of what our river authorities are doing, our groundwater districts are doing? What are some thoughts in terms of encouraging best management practices? Should we see encouragement from the state for more water recycling? What are some things that, as we think about water and its importance, that we need to be thinking about in terms of energy and the other uses as well?
That's a great question, and water is, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, as I would say.
That's right.
Here in East Texas, and I think it's important for us as East Texans who have this resource, and many times we're very protective of that resource, and we're always looking over our shoulder thinking someone's coming to get our water, which is partly true at times, but I think there are solutions to be had. I think if we have the right approach and we really realize, I joke with some of our colleagues that are challenged with water, that in many of these areas, there's got to be a deal there. They have money and we have water. So I feel like we can work it out some way. But I think part of it is us thinking a little differently. For a long time, we always thought, well, we need more water, you build another reservoir. And not that we don't need reservoirs, but there are other opportunities and technologies that can help us solve these problems, and it doesn't involve necessarily building another reservoir and going through some of the challenges you have there with private property issues and things of that nature. And so recycling is as it relates to the oil and gas industry, and you have companies that are doing some tremendous things in that area right now from a technology standpoint. Here in East Texas, we're particularly challenged as it relates, when I think of water, I also think about the disposal of that as well, and we think about the challenges we have here in East Texas, again, talking about those folks across the border there in Louisiana, when it comes to disposal, they have very little over there. They don't permit those wells over there, and so we get the trash, and we get a little benefit from that, and so. And it's led to other challenges that we have here with overpressurization of the Rodessa, for example. And when it comes to oil and gas production, if you can't dispose, you can't produce. And so at some point, if you don't solve that problem, it begins to affect production in our region as well. And so water is a big thing. We need to be looking at new technologies. Chairman Larson he eats and sleeps and breathes the water stuff, and he's a big thinker in this area. He wants to talk about aquifer storage and recovery and recycling and desal, and all those options are on the table, and I think we have to be looking at that, because you can live without a lot of things, but you can't live without water. And when you look at the state of Texas and the projected growth of this state, doubling the population in the next 50 years, we're going to have the resources in place to support that kind of growth. And unless we start to think a little differently and find solutions to these problems, that's going to be one of the biggest limiters of our future growth.
I think, yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
One of the things that we've seen in my part of the world with this extraordinary development of our oil and gas resources is the effect that it's had on technology-driven water solutions. I will tell you that the oil and gas industry has been particularly innovative and finding ways to utilize water and reuse it without disturbing the freshwater zones, which in my part of the world, if you're a windmill depth for your livestock, then that is certainly should be untouchable from a oil and gas development standpoint, and they have been very sensitive to that, and they have developed techniques to exploit brackish water aquifers and treat that water, and they have done so effectively and efficiently to where it's cost effective for them to do it. Everything is money motivated, but when you live in an area that our residents who live and work in the oil field and raise their children, it's problematic when they don't have water for their homes and they see around them oil and gas production utilizing water resources. So companies like Pioneer, and I will call them out in particular because they have invested over $100 million in developing pipelines to distribute wastewater effluents from Odessa to the region in West Texas. Now, obviously, they use that water for their exploration and production purposes, but then they had the capability to deliver water to communities who have no resources for that. And so this has been a very positive outcome for, and a byproduct, if you will, from oil and gas production is the effect that it's had on technology and science and deliverability of water solutions to a water-challenged region.
The industry is absolutely wanting to partner, wanting to find those solutions like they've done with those communities. And I think, you get pitched things all the time in the legislature about this idea, this project, fund this. The reality is, if you need to build a new reservoir, if there needs to be a new system, and you look at that cost, you look at the cost of recycling. How can we make that more competitive? Because it's kind of pricey today. It's difficult to make the economics work, as you mentioned. So, what do we need to do, and how do we bring any partners to the table that need that water and develop some partnerships moving forward? There's nothing that can't be solved without rolling up your sleeves and really figuring it out. So I applaud all of you as leaders who are looking at these options and thinking outside the box a lot of time. Representative Springer, you still with us?
I'm still here.
Man, you have been patient.
No,
I'm sorry.
End of the line, and that's fine. Hey, but
well,
on the water thing, I mean, one of the things is Select Energy's headquartered in Gainesville, Texas, and they're the leader now in water in the oil field, and have come up with technologies, and they continue to reduce that cost of that recycling to now where basically one tank load of water can complete the whole well, move it to the next one, and they're pulling the parts out that they can't do and working from that standpoint. So the technology is rapidly catching up. A lot of, from what Brooks said, is how did we get to 65 being the new 100? It's because they figured out how to reduce those costs in that technology. And technology is a huge driver. When you look at, it used to be how many guys went out on F-250s out to the well sites to check the well pressures and everything. But now you got a guy showing up at the well site and he's driving a van because he's got to have all his computer equipment to figure out all the new valves. Are they connected to the satellite? Because now they can increase production on these without having to worry about, what pressure levels are they at. And boy, we can have a problem if it doesn't shut off before the guy gets back out there. And so, technology is a big game changer.
It's huge, and your district is huge. You have 22 counties. Senator, what do you have now in your?
19.
You've got 19. You have 22 counties. We've mentioned finance, we've mentioned education, we mentioned water, innovation, technology, and we're all talking about energy. But you mentioned drivers, thinking about drivers, transportation. I mean, there's an article in the Texas Tribune this week that talked about the rapid development, what was occurring on the roads. We know, if you've driven in Austin lately, how horrible the traffic is just from congestion, not to mention the other urban areas of our state. Chicken, beef, oil and natural gas, cotton, it all comes from the rural areas. It has to get to the urban areas where it can go. So we're all in this together, thinking about transportation and the volumes that are paid. Some of the oil and gas today is probably 60, 70, sometimes 80% of the entire county budget. So they're paying a good bit. I know next session will be a transportation session in terms of where the dollars are going to be spent. Are they going to be spent in the energy corridors where this can continue to produce? Will the congested areas receive the relief that they need? Will the county governments who are producing the severance tax, producing the sales tax, all these things, will they get a little relief? What are some thoughts? And we can all jump in, but start us out there.
You're exactly right, and that is the challenge. There's a whole bunch of transportation needs. I mean, one of the things we did in the 84th is, we had a good year for budgets, and we put some money back into those oil field roads that had been torn up. For those guys who live out in our part of the world, you said, hey, I paid for this county road once, and now we see all the oil and gas, and yeah, it was nice having it there, but now we got to pay for the roads again to be fixed. And, can't we leave some of that severance tax behind? And so, we've explored that, but because of the problems we see in the congested areas inside the urban centers, that's probably not going to fly. And so we've got to figure out how do we balance that. At the same time, everybody's saying we want property tax relief. We talked about reform last session, but they're really looking for relief. And how do you do that? Do you sit here and say, let's figure out what the transportation system costs, let's adjust and make that a consumption-based deal, take some of the money that came out and use that to buy down property taxes, and so you can give tax relief and then move a little bit to the consumption just on the transportation piece of it. And, is that a solution? And what does that look like? You've got to have the facts in front of you, because people say, well, let's go to a consumption base. And Drew and I had these conversations in Ways and Means so many times. And you say, but what does that mean? And once we paint you that picture, you go, no, I think I like it the way it is today. And so I don't like my property taxes being that high, but I sure don't want to pay 25% on my sales tax, as the last panel talked about. We've got a big case coming up this week, or next week, in the Supreme Court. It's talking about a case called Wayfair versus South Dakota, talking about whether we now start taxing the sales on the internet. Everybody thinks Amazon pays there. They pay about half of what they sell in the state of Texas. The other half goes uncollected. I say we have 28 million tax cheats, because I bought something the other day and it didn't collect the sales tax, and I can't figure out, Glenn Hager won't return my tax. How do I pay that $2 I owe in sales tax? So I'll blame Glenn on that one. But, it just makes sense in the economy we're going to. We have to make those changes because we have to be able to address the transportation needs to be able to keep the heart of the energy market going. It fuels Texas. We do have we're much better off because we have a diverse economy. When we saw it go from 100 to 30, we didn't see the massive recession like we saw in the 80s. And so that's a testament to some of the things we've done with the Texas Miracle, of bringing other companies in other sectors to be able to balance that out. But energy will always be a big part of Texas, and we need to make sure that we've got the resources there to make it go.
Looking at funding sources, the rainy day fund, economic stabilization fund is an $11 billion fund. It's paid for 99.99% by oil and gas revenue streams. There's always a big concern about spending out of that, not maintaining a healthy balance, which we all of you are businessmen, you understand the need to have resources and how important that is. But we also recognize that there are needs. Transportation is one of them. Is that off the table, or is it something that might be considered to look at that fund to go fill these one-time needs where you're trying to rebuild after there's been a big level of activity? Or
Let me kind of address on that. The legislature has looked at that, exactly what you're talking about, and the last several sessions, they have stepped up and used some of those resources for critical things. I think it was 2013, legislature stepped up, took $2 billion out of the rainy day fund for water, create water resources. 2014 was the actual vote by the public to use half of the deposits from oil and gas going into the rainy day fund for infrastructure, roads and bridges of the state. And so it is being used for a lot of stuff. This past legislative session, legislature stepped up and realized that mental health was a big issue and that our state hospitals for mental health needed some help. And so I think we took several $100 million out for mental health. And so the legislature is stepping up. They're very we're being very cautious, not to make it part of an operating budget, but to use it for some of these things that are one-time needs that, and there's something actually there when we spend the money. So I think the legislature is.
You know, I think James White had a bill that we considered taking 2% of the severance taxes and actually dedicating that back to rural roads that have borne the brunt of production for those natural resources. And I thought that was a good idea. It didn't pass, but I would suspect that that type of idea would come back. We just need to reinvest some of the bounty that's coming from rural areas. Last time I checked, they don't raise beef cattle in the back of the HEB. Now, y'all have a lot of beef cattle around here. I was pleasantly surprised driving through the country yesterday. Y'all have quite plentiful number of cattle here. They don't raise cotton in the back of the Men's Warehouse either. Oil and gas is found other than in the Wise County area and Parker County. Most of it is in rural Texas, but it comes with a cost. It comes with a cost to the infrastructure, and if you don't have the infrastructure that can deliver that resources to market, then folks in suburban Texas are not going to be able to have the electricity. You got to have pipelines delivering that product to the coast and to the refineries. You have to have transmission lines that deliver that electricity so that people can turn on their air conditioners. And again, it comes with a cost. And so when I look at investing in road infrastructure in particular, I think that it with the exception of $235 million, the one-time infusion for rural roads, I mean, they're being neglected. Now, is there a need to relieve congestion in urban areas? Absolutely. But there's also a need to fund vital infrastructure maintenance, if you will, in rural Texas so that we can continue that flow of oil and gas, electricity, food, fiber, hide and hair to the markets.
You know, safety is a driving factor for the need for good roads, and we all want safe roads. We need them in rural areas, we need them in urban areas. That's a big part of it. And chicken doesn't come boneless and skinless and ready for the microwave, as the public seems to think sometimes. We've talked a lot about infrastructure today, roads, water, educated workforce is infrastructure in my mind too. You mentioned pipelines. You can't get your beef or your chicken or your logs to the ports or the processing centers without going on roads to get there. You can't safely move oil and natural gas without pipelines to do that. I know many of my friends in the Farm Bureau and cattle raisers and others want to see some changes to eminent domain reform. I think members of the oil and gas community, I will tell you, work hard to responsibly make certain that landowners are treated fairly. Not everyone operates to the same level and standards, we all know, but the most part of the long-term players are doing it the right way. I think recognizing the need for infrastructure, making certain that the conversation is moved from emotion to maybe what rational policy might be is something that's helpful for everyone. Because we've got to have it all. You've got to turn on the light switch. You have to have electrical lines, water lines in urban areas, and so we want to do it the right way. So any good solution ideas there, I know everyone would welcome for sure. You know, because of low-cost natural gas, we're experiencing unprecedented level of new construction in Texas. Manufacturing facilities that 10 years ago would be going to countries that we only read about, most of us never visit. Today, those plants are being located along the Texas Gulf Coast. They're being planned to be expanded. It's exciting to see that. Property taxes is a big burden that makes our projects not competitive with other sister states that don't rely so heavily on property taxes. Having transportation corridors to move product there is important, as we discussed, but having an ability for state government to be able to go in and to be a deal closer was important to Governor Perry. It's been important to Governor Abbott. I know those types of projects have come into criticism because of the lack of transparency, the lack of clarity of how those dollars are being used. Is there a conversation about maybe adding some accountability to measures to those types of programs so that we can be competitive with these other states and make certain these projects do land in Texas and not in Mississippi or Missouri or Tennessee or even India or China? Think that'll be a big issue this next session?
Yeah, Todd, you're exactly right. The Chapter 313 and the tax abatements, we would not get these massive asset-dependent dollar projects if we weren't able to do that, because they would go to Louisiana. And you can sit here and say, well, geez, there's $1 billion, liquefied natural gas export facility being built. Well, they build it over, we can just run the pipeline if it's that much cheaper to do it in Louisiana and see those built over there. And so, and what does that do? Well, that drives down the cost of what they're willing to pay for the natural gas here. And so it is important to be able to have those tools, but they have to be used responsibly. You have to have that transparency. I think we improved on that quite a bit in the 84th when we redid some of those. We had an interim study on the incentive programs. We saw some of the problems with the enterprise fund maybe in the first days that it was done. Emerging Technology Fund, we said, maybe the state doesn't need to be in the venture capital business, and we stopped that one. And so I think we have reevaluated those. They always need to be improved. Taxpayers' dollars, gone are the days, and I tell my county judges and commissioners this sometimes when they say local control, hey, we know what's best. I said, taxpayers no longer want to say, trust us, we know what will do the best for you. They want that transparency. They want to be able to have that input, and it's fine, but they've got to, just because you can yell and scream about it, if you're 1% yelling and screaming, we don't like it, the rest of the 99% are going to keep this state going forward.
Just kind of following up on that, and I agree with Drew completely. It's just that, I don't think any of us really like having those type of programs. And I know I would like a government grant for my law office, and I would like some help in that too. And there's something that seems fundamentally unfair, and is fundamentally unfair in a free market, about taking taxpayers' dollars and using them to close deals or to bring in different business. The other side of that is, though, it's not a perfect world. If we were a perfect world and we had a perfectly free market, we wouldn't do that. But one of the big problems we have is we have to do it because Oklahoma doesn't, because New Jersey doesn't, because Kansas does. And so we don't really have that level playing field. If it was up to me in a perfect world, we wouldn't have them at all. But we're going to have them as long as the people that are competing with us use that as well. But that said, there's always better ways to do it. We had one in my district that they gave one to bring in a Lowe's truck stop. Well, it's not that we really were short on truck stops in the district. So was that obviously a proper use for a tax abatement? No, it wasn't. And the other truck stops didn't like the fact that this one got it. So I think until you have some kind of national discussion, which you are never going to have, about fair levels of competition, we're going to have that because we have to compete with Oklahoma and Arkansas and everybody else doing the same thing.
That's a really good tangible example of, would it be built there anyway if the market would support it or not? When we think about globally, China is a lot of state-owned assets. The forms of government around the world today do things that aren't based on free market economics. They do it with the intent to capture that market share, to subsidize it in a way. So those are big issues, ones I'm glad you guys are working on and will solve for us. That's great. Anything else on that before we move forward? Regulatory certainty is important for anyone making an investment. Jeff Mosley this morning, Judge Mosley at TAB, talked about NAFTA a little bit. Texas has benefited greatly from the North American Free Trade Agreement. We see Mexico as a developing market for oil and gas products today. Texas sells more oil and gas products to Mexico than anywhere else. A lot of jobs associated with that. What are you hearing at home in regard to NAFTA and trade policy? And Are people worried about this? Are they focused on this? Or is this something that just happens on the nightly
Can I
news?
say- I hate to talk twice in a row, but can I say something on this? I said this yesterday to a group I spoke to. You know, we've got the issue with China going on, and then we've got NAFTA renegotiations and all of that. And I just think everybody kind of really just needs to just chill out a little bit. You know, I mean, frankly, people worry about a trade war. We've had one with China forever. We just hadn't realized that, or at least we hadn't acknowledged it. And nobody's IRA's gone up or down, and mostly down more than mine has over the last couple of months since the president keeps tweeting about these things. But at the end of the day, I just wish everybody would just give Trump and the administration a little bit of slack. I think he's a very good negotiator, and he's got decades of proof of that. I think that he's started off like we all do whenever we're in a tough negotiation. We start off from a very strong position. And I think that if we'll just be a little bit patient and take a breath, I think this is ultimately going to end up in a better NAFTA. I mean, there's obviously after the decades that's been in place, there's certainly it's a whole different world of commerce than it was when that was negotiated. And I think there's a great case to be made that just because of time and change in technology and the way commerce operates, it needed to be renegotiated. But there's also a great argument to say it really wasn't ever the best deal for us. And certainly the situation with China is not the best deal for us, not just on the tariffs and such, but and subsidies, but on the side of theft of intellectual property, which is in the tens of billions of dollars every year. And so my encouragement is everybody just take a breath, let the Trump administration work through that. I'll just bet you that before we get to the November elections, I'll bet you that we've got a new NAFTA deal worked out, and I think we'll see some improvements in our situation with China and some of the other folks that are trying to take advantage of us who are trying to do the right thing the fair way. And I think that it's going to be really good, but I think we've got to give the president and the administration some time and some room to negotiate tough. You can't just come in and say, well, look, we just want to adjust this a little bit. You've got to come in and say, we're going to put our foot on your neck and enforce this, and that's just the only way you could deal with it in this type of environment. And then they'll negotiate it back, and I bet at the end of the day, we've got a really fair, attractive deal for the United States and for Texas on NAFTA and on China and on other places that we're trying to kind of work some deals with.
Anything else?
Well, I think as far as NAFTA is concerned, as it relates to the energy industry, you know, a few years ago, Mexico City partially privatized the state-run energy conglomerate Pemex. And as we know, the Eagle Ford Shale extends down into northern Mexico, and there is some opportunity for some of the newly privatized oil and gas developers in northern Mexico to utilize some of the resources and some of the industrial expertise that oil and gas producers in South Texas and West Texas have. You know, we have an opportunity to export some of that know-how, and just because of the geographic proximity of those oil and gas plays, I think you know, Texas oil and gas producers have a real opportunity to benefit from that, and I think that's something that we should be mindful of in forming these policies moving forward.
It's amazing the difference in development here in Texas, the United States. Mexico has oil, they have natural gas. It's a difference of leadership, it's a difference of economic philosophy. And man, if you ever want to remind your children what it means to be an American, that's a great example to point to, the energy industry and the development, the quality of life and the opportunities between the two countries there for sure. We're running low on time. Don't want to take away an opportunity to hit an issue that you came here to Nacogdoches to talk about here this morning. And I'll leave it with a real light, easy subject. United States House of Representatives is going through a leadership change. Speaker Ryan announced he's going to be stepping down. The Texas House is going through a leadership change. The media always likes to make a real big play on this about the world's going to cave in when the change in leadership comes about. So does this mean the Texas Senate is going to take advantage of the House this next session because of this leadership change?
I'll just say the Texas Senate takes every opportunity to on the House. But as far as it comes to the leadership issue in the House, the Senate tries to stay out of House politics. So I don't get involved with that. I have 10 great state reps we work very closely together and work to get the job done for everybody in East Texas. And so we're watching to see what happens over there as well.
There's a great story about Sam Rayburn, since we're in East Texas, when, of course, he was Speaker in Texas and then Speaker in the U.S. Congress. And there's a great story about when he had of course, Democrats were in the majority by far at that time, and a young Democrat freshman came up to him one day and was complaining about how the Republicans were blocking something, and he said, Speaker, he said, you have just got to step on these Republicans. You've got to push them out of the way on this. They are our enemy in this. And he just was pushing, and Sam Rayburn is reported to have said, you know, son, I want you to understand that in the House, the Republicans are our opponents. The Senate is our enemy.
Well, I can tell you this, you have here in East Texas today some of the absolute best leaders in the Lone Star State, across the board, different parties, different people, different parts of Texas, but they're here because they love the Lone Star State. They want to work together and recognize the value in doing that, and we appreciate Senator Nichols, Representative Clardy, bringing the caliber of people here today. Let's thank our panel. Thank you very much for your work, your leadership. Commissioner Christian, your earlier panel, thank you all very much. Representative Clardy. We're free. We got a clock on you, though, but other than that.
All right, good. Okay. Hey, guys, thank you. Great job, wonderful panel. We had an outstanding session behind us on school safety, and appreciate the School Safety Center doing that. So we've got a lot going on right now. We're going to have a lot more coming up. But we're going to take a short break, a 10-minute break. We're going to come back here at 11 o'clock. A couple of things to remind you of. If you have questions, there's some cards here. People will be handing those out. Raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll make sure that you get a card. Other thing is, when we start, you'll hear the show will come back up, and I hope you'll pay a little attention to these vignettes of our SFA students talking about the importance of the university, what their education has meant to them, how it's relevant to the topic. We're coming back talking education, and we have this panel was good. I think the next panel might even be a little better. So see you back here in a little bit. We're going to start sharply at 11 o'clock. Thank y'all.